Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So make sure you're in the right place. This is Language at the Core, why all students need academic language development. And this is designed for grades 6 through 12. My name is Gina Chavez. I'm the director of the California Reading and Literature Project at Cal State Los Angeles. And I'm here with Deborah.
Okay, so I'm Debbie Costa Hernandez, and I am the California Reading and Literature Project Executive Director, statewide office. Pleasure to be here.
So technically, she's my boss.
Just technically.
Just technically. But she's nice, so. Okay, so you saw this wonderful graphic this morning, and this shows you all the themes, and really is that graphic organizer about the framework. And let's see if our beautiful animation works. So recognizing that we know all these themes work together and they overlap. And your session right now is on language development. Language development. So we're looking at language at the core. So just so we can get an idea of who's in the room. And judging from the general session, we didn't have too many teachers. So let me start with teachers. If you are a classroom teacher.
Yes.
Yay, we have more. Wonderful. Great, great, great. And if you are support, any kind of support, a TOSA, instructional support, excellent, excellent. How about site administrators? Okay. And district administrators? Wonderful. Okay, so it looks like we're mainly teachers and support, so we're really looking at, probably want to look at instruction, but as you heard this morning, we're providing a general overview of this theme in the framework. Our time is short, so we're going to look quickly at some resources that you'll have in the framework in this theme. And it's not going to be a real deep examination, but our goal is to get to a vignette so that you can see a vignette. That's where you'll see the most instructional and strategies. Although we're not focused on strategies, we'll look at one. We're looking big picture through the lens of language. So you saw the graphic with the circles going around with the different themes. And we know our themes are content, knowledge, foundational skills, effective expression, and I'm missing one, content knowledge. So just for a moment, think, why did language development emerge as its own theme with the same level of importance as those other themes? Why do you think language development is so important? Okay, and what are your thoughts about that? Anyone? We'll go, whoa, that was 4 altogether. 1, 2, 3, 4.
You can't manipulate the content without language or the literacy behind the content.
Okay, and then I think over here.
You need to have a certain understanding of the language to make meaning.
Great. And I think it was right here. Deborah, did you have a comment? So you can summarize what they said.
Yes, I think language development is how they access the content and the curriculum. Definitely. It has to be in place.
And then right here with the turquoise.
Ditto, as well as allowing students to show their knowledge as well.
Okay, so I heard a lot of different things. Accessing the content, showing the content, discussing. So if you look at our next slide, it's all here. Language is really embedded in all of the strands of the standards. It's embedded in reading, writing, speaking, and listening. It's all throughout the English language development standards in those 3 parts: interacting in meaningful ways, understanding how English works, and using foundational skills. All of that requires a language base. All the themes in the framework require that language base. And then in the framework, we're really looking at promoting and increasing language proficiency and sophistication. So when I was a very young teacher, over 20 years ago, the analogy I was given was that reading and writing are like 2 boats that sit on a sea of oral language. So you have to have a broad base of language in order for those two boats to sit. So we could even add other boats that say content knowledge and meaning making and effective expression. You have to have a lot of language to start with in order to perform in those areas. So at the 6-8 level, I think we're missing a word. Should that say build on? The 6th through 8th grade standards build. I think there should be an on. Since this is language, should that be on or upon? But you
Build
get it.
on, yeah.
That makes sense. Thank you. So knowing that that started in TK5, so we're just continuing, yes? And we want to increase the breadth and complexity of the language skills. The breadth and complexity. Complexity is the word that always stands out to me, is how do I do that? So let's take a look at a standard, 6th through 8th grade. So notice that this is reading literature, reading informational text, 6th through 8th. Determine cognitive, figurative, and the technical meaning of words and phrases, analyzing the impact of those word choices. So think about that for a moment. What's the language demand there? So this is what you're trying to achieve with students. What do they have to be able to do with the language? Basic meaning. So they've got to have that first, then the connotation. Great. I heard something else. What else? So thinking of the analogies or allusions to other texts, how might they demonstrate that? So notice the bottom, the standards that we're looking at. Here's an example, again, 8th grade. So take a moment to read that one.
They're all in the room.
So here we're looking at sentence patterns, expressing ideas precisely. This is interesting, while eliminating wordiness. Okay, that's a tough one because I talk a lot. So think again, what are we asking students to do with language here? Yeah.
I was just going to say that this demands that they have multiple tools in the toolbox to way to say something.
Yes.
And they're deciding on which
Yes.
is the most appropriate concision, whatever, for whatever context.
Yes.
And so if you're going to vary your language for context, that means you need to have lots of different resources available.
Yes.
I know, and as English speakers, we do that, and it's not very transparent. We just do it. You do it depending on the context, and I know that I do it when I notice that someone doesn't understand me. I switch right away. Let me say it this way, or let me do this. But I don't consciously say, now I'm going to use this strategy. Now I'm going to use this, or I'm going to do this. But you're right. You've got to have all those tools right in your back pocket.
And if I can say on Appendix B, which is going to be a chapter of the ELD standards, and it talks about the kind of feedback that this type of requirement, what this requires when we're providing feedback for students in their writing is that you're not going to give them feedback to make their writing more interesting. It's not about making more interesting. It's about making it more engaging, more concise, more precise, right? So that's it changes even the kind of feedback and how we work with students in their writing and in their speaking as well.
So what Debbie just said, I think we highlighted right here, pulled right out of there. Engaging, multiple meanings. How do I access that immediately when I need to? So again, more language embedded in the standards. And here's our last example. Applying knowledge of the language to understand how language functions. And I'll never forget, I was giving an oral language test to I think she was 4th grade. And she caught on that I was testing her sentence structures and syntax. And so after when we were looking at her performance, she asked right away, did I get that one? Did I say it right? How do I say it? And she wanted, this was a testing situation, she wanted instruction right then because it became apparent to her that there are certain ways that we say things. And after that I heard, since I wasn't her teacher, but after that I heard that language awareness button just clicked on her in her mind immediately. And she was constantly after that asking, did I say it correctly? Did I use the right word? Is that the right sentence? So really looking at the language awareness, having students be aware of the language that they're using.
So as you can see, is the mic on? Just want to check. Okay, as you can see in the sample of the standards that we highlighted, in the framework, language development, is academic language development encompasses four important key ideas. One is it's about vocabulary development, and you saw some of that in the standards, right? But in many places, when we talk about academic language development, that's where people stop. They said it's about vocabulary, and it's not sufficient. We're also talking about building students' grammatical and discourse understanding, how to compose different grammatical structures to convey different ideas, not only at the sentence level, but at the text level. It's also about, this is important in the framework, it's about this language awareness, a meta-linguistic awareness, understanding how language works. And the metaphor, the analogy that best works for me is to think of a magician and taking the kids to behind the curtain to see how they perform the tricks. And so what you see here is not magic, it's tricks. And this is what the magician knows. The magician knows that the brain is expecting to see something and they play with that. The magician knows that your eyes move in a certain way and that's why they do the trick in this way. The magicians know that people want this to work, so they do it this way. So you take them behind the curtains and you reveal for the students and help the students understand, how is it that writers use language? How is it that authors use language? How is it that educated people use language to convey, to communicate, to convey ideas, right? The academic language development is the theme of academic language development. It's for all students. All students. Now, ELD standards, it didn't do it. I had my animation that amplified the ELD point, but not here, so you missed it. The ELD standards then amplify, augment the emphasis on language development and language awareness for English learners. Okay, so it's not as a way to dumb down or water down the language, it amplifies and supports this focus on language, academic language for all students. But when we're talking about this theme of academic language development, I want you to think of all students, including our English learners and some of our standard English learners who don't get an assessment or official label, but that we know for them, academic language is also a second language or another language, and we need to work with them. And when we talk about English learners, we need to keep in mind that our English learners are learning content through English, are learning to use English, are learning about how English works simultaneously in our classrooms, in our schools. So ELD, or English Language Development, is that unifying force, is what helps the students or helps the teacher plan for students access, support for learning content through English, learning how to use English to express what they know about that content, and also understand how English works. This behind the scenes look at, okay, how is it that they use it to convey these ideas? Why do they organize text in that way? What are the tricks they have? And how can I own those same tricks? So it's after lunch, and that carb load from the sandwiches, right? The blood is kind of all around here. I can sense it. So rather than a quick write, what I'd like you to do is very quickly, with the person behind you, next to you, talk about what is your definition of academic language? How do you define academic language? Very quickly, 30 seconds. Turn, talk. So what I'd like you to read, you're getting a handout is yellow. So you're going to go to figure 212. And here's your purpose for reading. And it's going to be a very quick glance at the text. Your purpose for reading is how does the framework's description of academic language matches up against your definition of academic language? Right? Your purpose for reading is to compare how does the framework's definition of academic language or description of academic language matches up to your definition of academic language. And 1 minute. So I'm going to ask you to stand and find a person from the other side of the room. So from this half, you're going to find a person from this half. Find one person and share how did you find that this definition or description of academic language compared to your initial definition of academic language. But you need to pay attention when I raise my hand. This is the signal to come back to your seat. I'm not going to say anything, so I'm going to raise my hand when it's time to come back to your seat. Ready? So can you please stand and find a person from the other side of the room and share your ideas? Can I have a couple of ideas of something that maybe you already had in your own definition and found validation in this text, or something that is perhaps more explicit than you thought, or something new to you can add to your own definition of academic language? Yes, please.
My partner Mary Barbara and I were discussing that originally we were looking at academic language as academic vocabulary, not necessarily content specific, but now I can see that they're doing more as academic language and not just vocabulary. Vocabulary is a part.
Vocabulary is a part, not just all. And I had that idea too, and I thought the 3 tiers of vocabulary, especially tier 2 and tier 3, but is much bigger, much broader than vocabulary. Thank you. Somebody else? Who wants to please? Across all subjects. The shared responsibility for language development. Everyone, all hands on deck. All hands on deck. Because if you saw the level of sophistication that the standards are asking us for, right? It can't be just one teacher. It's all hands on deck for that. Anybody else? One last comment. Something that caught your attention in this description of academic language. Please. Audience and purpose. There's a purpose for using academic language. And that's important because language is social. Our learning is social. And so that is important to keep in mind because we're not talking about teaching academic language in isolation. We're not going to be teaching grammar in isolation. It's all about embedded in the content that we're teaching, but we're very intentional about the language that we're using and the language that the students are going to use to share what they are learning. So I just want to highlight, I'm sure you highlighted it, but make sure that we hone in on 3 things. On the second paragraph, right in the middle, where it says, however, academic English encompasses much more than vocabulary. In school and other settings, students choose particular language resources in order to meet the expectations of the people with whom they are interacting, which is what you shared. The next paragraph, first sentence, from this perspective, language is a meaning-making resource. And academic English encompasses discourse practices, text structures, grammatical structures, and vocabulary, all inseparable from meaning. And in the last paragraph, the first sentence, not all children come to school equally prepared to engage with academic English. However, all students can learn academic English, use it to achieve success in academic tasks across the disciplines, and build upon it to prepare for college and careers. And that, if you can highlight it, underline it, amplify it, frame it, because that's important. Because many of us, not in your districts, not in your schools, but we've interacted with colleagues who can identify and tell us what the kids are lacking. And our students don't have academic language, and that's why they struggle. The difference is the division of this framework is that we can teach it, and they can learn it. And where is that going to happen? Where are they going to learn academic language? In school. And it's not going to be by accident. It has to be intentional, purposeful, planned. Right? So the next piece, we're going to read, and some of you alluded to this already, but if you recall, how many of you recall BICS and CALP? Basic interpersonal communication skills and cognitive academic language proficiency. So people talk about language, social language, and academic language. And I think that framework served us for a while, for us to understand why is it that some students that sound proficient in English are not succeeding in school. Right? That's what that framework, that's what Commons came out with that framework, because he wanted to explain to us that what we were hearing was the social language. But in order to be successful in school, they needed academic language. Now, we need to move that forward. And now understand that there's not this dichotomy. It's not social versus academic. It's about audience, task, linguistic resources. It's about register. So the next piece that you're going to read is figure 2.14. And this is a short one. And your purpose for reading is to identify 2 or 3 key ideas, key takeaways from this discussion about register. And we have about 2 minutes for this. So can I hear from a couple of you, what did you highlight as an important point to remember or take away from this discussion about register?
The characteristics, I'm a teacher, I'm not used to a mic, of these academic registers, which are critical for school success, include specialized and technical vocabulary, sentences and clauses that are densely packed, and on to the end of that sentence.
Raise your hand if you found that to be an MIP for you as well. Thank you. Another MIP for somebody else. Please.
The grammatical patterns that are found in specific disciplines, just for myself, recognizing that, and I think where it says the teacher, if a teacher has to recognize this themselves to be effective, very, very powerful for me.
Thank you. Raise your hand if you also identify that as one of your MIPs. Can I hear from a third person? Please.
That register is the relationship between contents, the audience, and the relationship between the speaker and the audience, and that the teacher provides many opportunities to practice in these different registers so that students can choose which is the most appropriate register at the most appropriate time.
Thank you. How many of you identify that as an MIP for you as well? Thank you. So if you see the difference between talking about either or, social or academic, and talking about adjusting to audience, task, context, very different, right? But the smarter people I know are able to do that seamlessly. They move from being with friends and talking one way and being in a professional setting and talking in a different way with colleagues in an informal way, but in the work setting and talking, making presentations, or even in their writing. They are able to adjust, and they have all the linguistic tools to do that. So I thought that just to keep our brains, like the blood going back to the brain, because I know mine is fighting right now with gravity. I thought that we'd do something a little fun. So let's play with register for just maybe a minute. So I'm going to give you a statement, and I want you to change the register to a more formal academic register. So the statement is, he thinks he's all that, but I have news for him, he isn't. That's the statement. He thinks he's all that. But I have news for him. He isn't. Change it to an academic register. Change it to a formal register. Write that statement into a more academic. So he thinks he's all that. But I have news for him. He isn't. See if you can do it with the same attitude, like he isn't. Okay, who wants to try? Who wants to try? We have one in the back. If you start laughing first.
They got even went less formal.
They got less formal? No, it was in the other direction. Who wants to share? We have one person to share here.
That gentleman is quite arrogant, and I feel the need to deflate his ego somewhat.
That gentleman is a bit arrogant. I feel the need to deflate his ego.
His opinion of himself is misguided.
His opinion of himself is misguided. Anyone wants to try another one? One here and one. Oh, it's all women. Excuse me. Yes, please.
His self-impression is grandiose. His public projection is contrived.
Can you repeat it again? His
Self-impression is grandiose. His public projection is contrived.
is contrived. Beautiful. And in the back?
A certain young man has an inflated opinion of himself, however, is seriously mistaken.
Beautiful. Now, all of you up the register to a formal register, right? Did you all use the same vocabulary? Did you all use the same grammatical structures? In fact, I think everybody used a different grammatical structure. That's the difference. Those are the skills we want our kids to have. The ability to move from an informal to a formal register seamlessly, just like you did. You require knowledge about vocabulary and knowledge about grammatical structure, and they were at your disposal because you had 30 seconds, and you were able to do it. So that's the goal. Okay, I tried one, and it was his appraisal of self-worth is misguided. Somebody has to tell me. Thank you. So, and then my next slides are mostly a summary of what we just read, just to re-emphasize that academic registers include very specialized in tech vocabulary, a variety of sentences that are densely packed with meaning. The text that is structured in different ways. Who knows what hedging language is? Anyone knows what hedging language? Like hedge. In science, this is an example. In science, when you research, the statements usually go by like research suggests, findings point to. It's never a definite. Kind of around the edges, the hedging language, because there's always the assumption that you can prove that point, that you can prove that wrong, that you can find even more. So it's never, this is what it is this is what research suggests. And that's important for students to understand that. As an example, so what we just talked about, we make these switches, we make this easily because we have the tools. And for many of our English learners and standard English learners, these tools are not available. So they don't always know how to do this automatically. So our task is to help them do explicitly what we can do implicitly, like we just did. And then this is more about registers and vocabulary and how important it is to engage students in conversation and dialogue. It's not about teaching grammar in isolation. It's all about giving the kids the opportunities to use the language and elevate their language. And I don't know about you, how many of you are in supporting roles? You coach, teachers. I've done some coaching, and I can't tell you how many times I walk into a classroom and the teacher is using beautiful academic language. And the students are not.